I'm now very pleased to introduce ANZ's own Steve Dixon, a dedicated environmental, social and governance specialist at ANZ. Now, Steve has only recently joined banking, but has 20 years involved in the sustainability industry. He will lead you through some of the future trends we're seeing around conscious consumerism, especially in real threat of climate crisis. Steve.
All right, but I need to kind of centre you on the why. I've already mentioned that climate change is clearly real, but there are a number of these factors here that are all impacting businesses now and are impacting your customers at the same time. All right, so minds are being changed by a number of different components that are all coming at the same time, and particularly over the last 5 or so years. And this is one of them. So these are the January floods in Auckland. That very top bubble is what they got over 3 days in Auckland in January. The very bottom line is their January average, and the line in the middle is their entire summer average. All right, this is climate change. Now, this doesn't mean that every summer we're going to have these events. Climate change operates on the extremes. All right, the physics of climate change is that as the Earth warms and the atmosphere warms, it simply carries more moisture. So the same experience you have when you go to Surfers Paradise or Bali, where you step out of the plane and it's warmer and it's stickier. That stickiness is more moisture being carried by the atmosphere. It's simple as that. So when we get these storms coming through, they're carrying between 10 and 20% more moisture. When that moisture hits our hilly country, it drops. That's just one component of climate change. There are droughts, there's a whole bunch of other stuff you'll be aware of, including sea level rise. But this is what's making it real for lots of consumers. And that's why consumer behaviour is changing. So here are our implications, right? The price of carbon is already in most things you buy. It's in your fuels, it's in your electricity, it's in any of the materials that you purchase that might have a high carbon content, so that's your steels, or lots of building products, and so on and so forth, right? Clearly anything manufactured using a lot of gas and using a lot of coal is carrying a carbon weight with it. That weight has a price through our emissions trading scheme. Okay, so that is starting to be built in everywhere. Luckily, there are loads of incentives provided by the government and elsewhere to support businesses to manage this transition. And again, consumer preferences are big here. So let's have a look at this in depth, right? So Kantar do a survey every year on environmental attitudes called the Better Futures Report. So this data that you're looking at now is about 2 weeks old. So this came out at the end of March, and it covers 2022 and the very beginning of 23 because they did an extra survey post the Auckland floods to see what sort of impact those floods had had on people's attitudes to the environment, and particularly to climate change. And so what they measure is how they categorise people into 4 major areas of focus on sustainability and climate change and interest in this space. And so they define them as actives. That's that 35% there. You can see that's grown. The considerers, which are people who know it's the right thing to do but don't necessarily act on it every day. And then you have those who get it but don't tend to do much about it, and there's a variety of reasons that happens. A lot of it's to do with just availability and affordability and so forth. And then you have the dismissers, who are your uncle at the barbecue who tells you that climate change isn't real. And you're probably not going to move them, and they're probably not your market. So who are these people? Look, they're kind of everywhere, but they're not where you might expect them to be. So the darker the green, the more intent people are on sustainability, and not just sustainability, but purchasing sustainably. And I will recommend Kantar to you. All this data is available on their website for free, so you can dive into this data more than I'm going to show you today. But so what you can see is that those who are actives in this space, they tend to congregate in wealthier areas, so to some degree they are who you might expect them to be. But they're also really prominent in lots of rural areas. So look at all of the East Cape, look at central New Zealand, and central North Island, and look at Wellington. All right? So a lot of regional areas have people who really care about this stuff, and I won't speculate exactly as to why that might be, but it could well be, I'm about to speculate, having said I wouldn't, it might well be that they're living in rural areas, right? So they're front and centre in the food economy in New Zealand. And so this stuff is very real for them. how they grow food, you know, the lifestyle they want to live, the rivers that they can see as they drive around their region. Maybe that's the sort of stuff that's starting to impact their beliefs. Where you don't see a lot of green, interestingly, is around Canterbury. Yeah, I know. But I'm not allowed to say anything about that because we have thousands of clients in Canterbury, all right? But if you're a Canterbury restaurant or a Canterbury food producer, you might be thinking about this particular message when you do your marketing, right? There's other things that might attract them, but this is possibly not the message that's going to get them through your doors. Also, though, look at that Central Otago Dunedin slice, all right? A lot of that, I imagine, is to do with wealth. There's quite a lot of money in that part of our wee country. So there you go. The message here is that, yes, a lot of these people aligned with demographics around wealth, but they're also not all in the places where you might expect, particularly in rural New Zealand. They're there and they're about. And that's not to say just because it's a blue province, there's nobody there who cares about this stuff, right? And I'll show you some of those averages nationally to show that the people who care about this stuff are everywhere. Look, I won't rest on this slide for long. It's just a kind of an emphasis on what's on the mind of these people, right? So starting at the bottom there, I actively seek out companies and brands that offer ways to offset, right? So that's 38%, right? It's gone up a little bit, but everything else is near 50% or above, all right? I've stopped buying certain products or services because of their impact, all right? 51% of this overall survey nationally, forget about that provincial stuff now, this is a national result. And I can feel I can make a difference. So this is what's motivating these consumers. All right, they feel they can make a real difference. As an individual consumer going about your daily life, you don't necessarily feel that A, you may have a lot of impact on climate change, or B, you can really make much of a difference. All right, but these are people who are seeking to make that difference. And so when it comes to selling to this group, this is the story you want to tell them. You want to be able to say to them, here's an opportunity to make that small difference in your life. So last year, 43% of New Zealanders, 48% in Auckland, said that they wanted to live a sustainable lifestyle. And that didn't just mean answering a survey, that's aligned with answering a whole bunch of questions around what they're actually purchasing. And you can see this behaviour in the EV phenomenon that's happening in New Zealand, which is a faster growth rate than anywhere else in the world right now. So EVs and hybrids, 4 out of every 10 new vehicles landed in New Zealand are EVs or hybrids, right? So that number is just continuing to grow. Likewise, for those of you wandering through supermarkets, there are entire aisles of products now in the alternative protein and the alternative dairy space that didn't exist before, all right? And one of the things that we're seeing happening that's enabling this for people is that a lot of these products are not much more expensive than the alternatives that they're replacing, right? So if you go to the detergent space, for example, or the laundry space, your EcoStore product is the same or cheaper than any of the Unilever or Procter & Gamble or mainstream products, all right? So the scale of some of these products now has meant that they can actually be sold at the same price as the traditional options. And when you make it available for people, all right, this group in particular, if you make it available and affordable and accessible, they will buy it. EVs are an example of that, and a lot of these supermarket products are also a good example of that. However, that was last year. This is this year, all right? So the real world is that inflation and cost of living and a recession has hit. Okay, and that affects people's ability to respond to their desires to be sustainable, all right? So there's a challenge for those of us who are operating in this space, who are trying to sell into this space. Now you can see overall that growth and that trajectory of that line continues to be well above where it was a decade ago. And my expectation is that that won't change, that it will continue to grow. This isn't a fundamental difference that means all of a sudden nobody cares about climate change or the environment, right? Because those stats continue to hold up, all right? But what's happened here is that there's been a clear impact of the economy on people's feelings of ability to make these purchases. So that's the reality we're dealing with. Inside that figure, if you look at who's doing the purchasing here or who's saying that they want to live this way, that top line there, 45%, that's your older group. So there's a demographic there of those who are older, who perhaps don't have mortgages, who aren't being impacted by increased interest rates, have got more disposable income. They feel they're able to continue to do this. So there's no dent in their intent here. All right. So when you're targeting your marketing, and I know you've had a lot of conversations about marketing today, those of you who've stuck through the day, here's potentially a target of those who are still very much focused in this space. And pretty much intent drops as age does. So right at the bottom there, you see your 18 to 24s who are really struggling to believe that they can act in this space right now. That doesn't mean they've stopped believing in climate change. Their numbers are way higher than that older demographic when you ask them, is climate change real and do you care about it? So they still really care about it, but their ability to act on it has been dented. One of the things that was interesting when I looked through this data is how closely it relates to people's engagement with food. All right, so many of the activities that they say they do or want to do are in some way related to food. All right, trying to reduce food waste, composting the food that's left over in their homes, buying locally. And now many of these have had a bit of a dip, right? Again, the same dip that we've seen overall. Maintaining plant-based vegetarian diets, all right? So that's gone down from 12% from 19%. But that 19% was a doubling over 3 years, all right? So there's still a very significant component of our market out there who are vegetarian. So there's a really close connection here between food and sustainability and particularly people's actions in this space. The other thing you'll see a lot of close connection to is as a connection with waste. All right, so when you look through the survey data and other survey data, Kiwis really care about plastic and they really care about packaging and waste in general. All right, so something to think about if you're a product producer is look really closely at that stuff because people are making buying decisions based on how things are packaged now. There's also a bit of a trust issue here. So I'm sure it's not people in this room, but businesses have been out there fibbing about what, how sustainable they really are and how good their products really are, and people have been tainted by that. And so some of this data here is just showing that you've got to be firstly you've got to be very transparent and you've got to be clearly very honest, but you've got to really directly message the authenticity of what you're doing, okay? Which means not exaggerating what you're doing or what's possible, but tell them the story of your journey, all right? So Deadly Ponies is a client of the bank and a good friend of the bank, and they have been on this journey for quite some time. They started their production. They make real top-end handbags and shoes and coats and things. And they started their business off the back of gathering scrap leather out of waste bins from their competitors, right? So they've always been on this journey, but they were really clear about keeping their customers informed about how they're doing, including where they haven't been able to succeed. So one of the things they wanted to do was go zero waste. Now they produce in Thailand and in New Zealand, and they were really struggling to achieve that. So they had to bump their target from 2022 to this year. And they were really upfront on their website that they'd missed their target, but this is why, and this is what they want to do now. All right? So you can tell these stories, and you shouldn't stop telling these stories, because that big group of customers wants to know this stuff, and they will investigate you and interrogate your website to find out more. And if you've got the right answers, then you're an opportunity for them. But you do have to be really clear on where you are on that journey. Likewise, those of you who might be selling products into the bigger end of town, so the government or businesses, large corporates and the like. So there's a lot of movement happening at what we in the bank would call the institutional space, which is our large $50 million plus businesses. So this Climate Leaders Coalition, has anyone heard of the Climate Leaders Coalition? They got some work to do, haven't they? Because they have been doing some amazing stuff for about 5 years, right? This is 105 of our biggest businesses. All the banks, most of Fonterra, most of our big companies are a member of this group. Everybody in this group signs up to a pledge. They say we will be carbon zero by 2050. They say we will be on a what's called a science-based target, which is a reduction, absolute emissions reductions, reducing their carbon emissions in line with a 1.5 degree world, which for the likes of New Zealand Post is a 45% reduction in emissions by 2030. So all of these 105 businesses, they're the equivalent of 40% of our GDP and 60% of our emissions. So you all know them, and then many of you will already be doing business with them. They are on a mission to reduce their emissions. But not only that, they've also signed a pledge to support their suppliers to reduce their emissions, because as a supplier into these businesses, you are actually part of their footprint. The way carbon footprints are measured is that suppliers' emissions are incorporated into the emissions of a big business like this. All right? So you're what's called Scope 3 emissions to them. And that means you become their problem. As they're on a trajectory to reduce by 2030, they don't want to be importing loads of extra emissions into their footprint. So they're out talking to customers now about, suppliers now, about how are you going to support us to hit this target that we've committed to. So there's an opportunity there. It's not just a risk for you, it's an opportunity for businesses as they get on this journey and they can start to make these reductions, that actually you can position yourselves to sell into these big businesses because you're going to be supporting their overall direction. Likewise, just in the food space, this is just a snapshot looking across the web world. All right, pretty much everybody that you've ever heard of at the big end of town around food is on a journey to net zero by 2050 or before. All right, I will not read them all out. You can see them for yourselves. You've heard of all of them. They are massive in many cases, and they are buying a hell of a lot of our exports. So these are the people writing to Fonterra and Synlait and Silver Fern Farms saying, what are you doing about your footprint? Because we're on a journey to reduce and to get to net zero, and we need your support to do it. All right, so this is the general direction of everything. This is not a fad. This is just the way the world's headed. And again, this is what's driving so much opportunity. I don't like to have this conversation with businesses and paint it all as risk and compliance, because actually, as New Zealanders and food producers, we're incredibly well positioned to do well here. We've got a really positive story to tell about the way we grow food and the relatively clean and green environment that we grow it in. You know, do we need to work on stuff? Hell yes, all right? But we still have a very good and strong starting point, all right? Particularly in the way we get our energy. So for those of you who are doing, producing products which involves a lot of processing, our 90% renewable energy supply is just unheard of across the world. Only Norway and Iceland can compete. All right, so that's a brilliant story to be telling these people who are looking for product. And likewise, are there any exporters in the room? So this is the market. These are our 5 top markets. This is an NZTE survey. They categorise pretty similarly to the way you saw Kantar categorise. Look at those numbers for actives in our markets. Like astonishingly high numbers of people who are looking for sustainable food. And it's not a freak survey from 2022. They've been doing this for a number of years. This holds up. This is who we're selling into overseas. And a vast majority of those markets are looking for high quality, sustainable food. Now, they define sustainability slightly differently in some of these regions. Sometimes it's about packaging, sometimes it's about being local, sometimes it's all about animal welfare or more about animal welfare. So there's a bunch of different things going on, but the general trend, again, is really significant. So that is who Silver Fern Farms is trying to sell to, for example, with carbon zero steaks to the east coast of the US right now. All right, and they are making hay and getting access to distribution in markets that they've never got access before, using that branding of carbon zero. And it's real, and it's verified, and it's substantial. But that is the sort of market that our producers are going to want to be aiming for. Those of you in the food production game, they're going to be looking for products to take out to these markets. All right, I said I'd talk a little bit about costs, and this is just to blow the myth about, everything green is a premium, right? It's always going to cost you more. For most businesses in New Zealand, and I have to, for farmers, it's a slightly different issue, right? A lot of their emissions are coming out of the mouths of their animals. So they've got a different dynamic that they're going to have to manage, all right? So we need to treat them separately, which is what is happening right now with a whole bunch of investment and support in due course for farmers. But for those of you who are food producers or restaurateurs or whatever, You know, this is where your emissions are coming from. They're coming from your fuels, they're coming from your energy use, they're coming from any industrial heat you might produce, they're coming from your vehicles and your waste, right? And all of those different areas have existing solutions. And in many cases, in fact nearly every case, gas is a more difficult one to manage at the moment for lots of businesses. We don't have an alternative in most cases for gas, but it's coming. And that alternative will be hydrogen, more than likely in most cases. So in all of these cases, not only do you have a solution, the solution is probably going to save you money. All right, so we do a lot of loans to solar at the moment. So the price of solar in New Zealand has plummeted over the last decade. Right now you can produce solar energy off your roof at the equivalent of about 8 to 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So what are you paying on your energy bills right now? Probably 35 cents roughly, maybe less actually as a business if you're a major user. You know, you'll be in the late 20s, but that's a significant saving off the top of your roof. Most of these industrial systems and commercial systems that are going up now pay for themselves in 5 to 7 years. And so if you look at those numbers there, the monthly power bill of $350, to put that amount of kilowatts on your roof will probably cost you about $15,000, and it'll pay for itself in about 6-7 years, like I said. Likewise, building efficiency. Anyone who's operating a commercial building or an industrial building with HVAC in it, HVAC is AC, all right, get it commissioned. If it hasn't been commissioned by an engineer in the last year, get someone in. They will save you 15% before they even walk in the door. They can guarantee it almost now. And that's just about tweaking your AC so it's most efficient, so it's on at the times when you're there and not on the times when you're not there. And it runs at a really efficient rate, okay? So there's some basic stuff in that energy use area. But if you look at Green Star buildings, they use less than half of the energy of our traditional commercial buildings. And that also is similar for industrial buildings as well, and factories and the like. Likewise in waste, so you may not be aware, but there's a waste levy that you've already been paying for about a decade of $10 a tonne for all waste that goes to landfill. That's going up to $60 a tonne next year in stages, but they're pretty rapid stages. And so that is a direct cost to you as a business. As you put stuff out in your bins to go to landfill, that's going to hit you straight in the bottom in your pockets, right? And there's lots of opportunities, particularly in this space around food recycling, where we can potentially cut that from landfill. So again, you can do the right thing and you can save money. Likewise, electric vehicles, you'll be very familiar with this story because everybody now knows somebody or 4 or 5 people who have got an EV, right? EVs have got a couple of major advantages for businesses. One is this 40 cents equivalent per litre, right? That's roughly $1.50 to $2 cheaper a litre than you're currently paying on any fuel that you're using, right? So they have an ongoing operating cost, running cost that's way, way lower. Their capital cost is a little bit higher, but one of the other keys about EVs is that their maintenance costs are way less than half of your traditional vehicles. Your traditional vehicles have hundreds and hundreds of moving parts. It has fuel exploding in a cylinder every half a second to drive the pistons that make it work, right? An electric vehicle has about 10 moving parts in its engine. Therefore, it has next to no maintenance of its engine. Slightly tougher on tyres, but overall the maintenance costs of electric vehicles are way, way lower. And these battery lives that everyone is concerned about and should be concerned about, we're seeing vehicles now that are running way over 10 years. Right? So they're doing well over 150, 200,000 Ks. And many new vehicles that you'll buy now will give you a 150,000 K guarantee, but actually they expect those batteries to last for 300. It will depend on how you run them and how you treat them, but the longevity of these vehicles is relatively proven overseas now. So lots of opportunities in that space. So here's one of my favourite businesses that you'll be familiar with, Sawmill Brewery. They make about 1 million litres and growing of beer up in Matakana, north of Auckland. Very typical example of businesses that are kind of operating in this space that are doing some good stuff here. All right, so they're not overcapitalised, they didn't have a lot of money, so every single thing you see on that list had to stack up financially, right? So everything they've done, including the solar on their roofs, right? So they've upgraded their system recently but they were basically getting almost free energy all summer. Likewise, in winter, they were getting up to 70% of their winter energy needs off their roof. Okay, so it was a no-brainer for them to do that. Likewise, the grain sacks, so obviously it's a brewery, it's using a lot of grain. They were going through about 12,000 sacks a year. They've cut that out now completely. They've just got a silo that gets delivered to twice a year. Getting grain delivered to a silo is a lot cheaper. Bulk grain is cheaper than bagged grain, not surprisingly. So they've got rid of all of that waste, and they're getting cheaper raw materials into their business. So in each of those cases, and I won't go through all of them, but in each of those cases there was money to be saved. But the additional benefit here, which is what Mike is referring to in this quote, is that it hits in all areas. So not only does it save them money, but their staff retention is amazing, right? And those of you in hospital will know what this is all about right now, right? It's tough. But they have never had trouble retaining and keeping and getting staff. Because people, that same group of people who want to live a sustainable lifestyle, they would also like to work for businesses that align with their values. And so they've got no trouble. They've had staff for over 10 years in many cases. All right, so they got that additional advantage. But not only that, they also got access to a whole bunch of places, including most of our supermarkets, which is where most of you will have seen Sawmill, because they had this great story to tell. So category buyers are not necessarily going to always preferentially purchase sustainable product, but when you've got a really good product and a really good story wrapped around it, then it opens doors that might not otherwise be opened. Okay, so this has really helped them as a business. So they're scaling up big time now. They're going to grow, I can't tell you the exact number, but it's a significant growth from where they are now. And a lot of that's on the back of this great story they've got to tell, which is opening markets for them. So that was quite a lot to cover in about 20 minutes. I want to show you now, rather than trying to remember everything I just said, some places where you can go for help, because one of the differences now is that for businesses who are looking to engage in this space and not sure where to start, there's a hell of a lot more help out there than there used to be. So ANZ has a bunch of documents on its website that you can find there. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority and GenLess, they're both parts of the same thing, but they have specific targeted pages for businesses. All right, so that tells you about many of the stuff that I've just talked about. Talks about where to go for that information and how to go about it. Food and Grocery Council has a specific targeted space and activities in this area. Trade and Enterprise, for those of you who are exporters, big up. There's a whole kind of category in their website. And likewise, Toitu, who I haven't mentioned so far, but they're kind of New Zealand's #1 kind of carbon counter. And they do verified carbon audits for businesses, all right? So they've got a lot of information about this thing called science-based targets that I brushed over, but it's a major thing that's coming through, particularly the big end of town. But not only is there lots of information, there's actually money, all right? So ECCA, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, remember them, all right? So they in the last major budget in this space, so I didn't touch on all the regulatory stuff, but there is a $650 million budget for ECCA to support businesses to transition out of carbon. So a lot of the big end of town that were the high energy users where they're focused for the last year or 5, they have been working with those to basically subsidise them out of coal, out of gas, into biofuels and electricity, right? So that's your Fonterras, your Synlays, your Silver Fern farms, your major wood processors and so on and so forth. So they've worked hard at that big end of town to move gigawatts of energy out of coal and gas, but they're now starting to focus specifically in sectors which tend to be high energy users, but they're very small businesses that collectively make up a high energy use, but individually each business is reasonably small as far as their impact. And so those include brewing, coffee roasting, and covered cropping, but you can see they're growing into wine and cheese as well. And so these are what they call decarbonisation pathways. So they're like a 5-step program that they will take you through. So they'll give you an advisor to work with. And then as you kind of work out where your potential opportunities are to take carbon, which is cost, out of your business, they will then be able to support you with grants and loans. Actually, no loans, it's all free money in most cases. It's not guaranteed. Don't run out to them and say, Steve said it's free money, right? You have to go through the process and you have to do your own work, but at the end of the line, there is available grants to help to support businesses to transition. They also have work coming in the e-fleet space, in the EV space, and in what they're calling the equipment replacement scheme, which I can't tell you much about because it's pretty new and they haven't defined what exactly that means. But equipment is pretty much everything, right? So if they're serious about decarbonising, then potentially any piece of new kit will be more efficient than the stuff you're replacing. So keep an eye out on them on ECCA's website. Get on their newsletter list, get on their update list, because there's quite a lot of stuff that's going to be coming out of this space. And finally, what is the bank doing about this? All right, so we've been carbon zero for a decade. The bank has been reducing its waste. It's down by 70% over the last 5 years. So we've been doing loads internally. But our biggest footprint is you guys, right? It's our customers who we loan money to who have the biggest impact on the environment. So we've developed the Business Green Loan, which is a loan across a number of categories. You'll get a sense of those categories there. But again, I won't spend 15 minutes walking you through them all. Go onto our website and have a look specifically. But we'll support businesses to put in solar, to move to EVs, if you're on farm, to do planting, to do water quality improvements, to manage your effluent better, and so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of areas that will support businesses. And the important thing here is that the interest rate for these loans is at basically the bargain, the cost of the money to us. All right, so there's no margin, there's no risk weighting. If you came to the bank for a loan, just off the blue for anything or other, it would probably start with an 8 if you're lucky, all right, as your interest rate. These loans start with a 5 currently, all right, which is basically the cost of money for us on the market. So this is the bank trying to support transition and acceleration in this space. So have a look there. We also, have we got any ANZ mortgage holders by any chance? Yay! I'm only talking to him now. Right, so ANZ has a 1% loan for all of this good green stuff that's on the board there. 1% fixed loan. All right, so that's for solar, EVs. They call it internally the Tesla loan because it's up to $80,000 and a Tesla happens to be just a little less than that. All right, this loan has moved $100 million in less than a year. And this goes back to what I was saying before. That group of people who want to live a sustainable lifestyle aligned with their values, if you make it available, if you make it affordable, they will do it. All right? And in EVs, when I was first looking for an EV, I had the choice of a leaf or a leaf or a leaf, pretty much. All right? Now you've got a vehicle that will meet almost any need. All right? Including a van, including a ute, including pretty much any category that you might imagine apart from very heavy transport. And even there, you can get those. They'll just cost you $300,000 or $400,000. So all of these products are now available in a way they weren't before. And we can help at a very cheap rate. Just want to finish on kind of 4 messages, I guess. It's really clear that it's clear to me, and hopefully it's clearer to you now, that things are changing really fast, right? And if you want to get an advantage and be successful, and basically as a bank, we want to support our customers to be the most successful customers, because if you're successful, we're successful, right? So if you want to, compete and out-compete, then you're going to have to move. You want to get ahead of this curve. And one of the smart bankers, and I'm not a banker by trade, right? I've only been in banking for about a year, so I'm learning loads in this space. But one of our smarter bankers said to me the other day, the businesses that do really well in recessions are those who invest during the recession because they get an accelerated bump out of it. When the customers come back, they're ahead of where all of their competitors are. Now, not everyone can afford to invest during a recession, I get that, right? But there are opportunities in this space to cut costs out of your business by investing now at rates that you will not see again, that might enable your business to completely outcompete your competitors coming out of a recession. All right, so that's one thing to think about, moving fast and moving now. The other is that if you're going to be measuring your footprints, if you're going to be doing stuff in this space, you probably want to start from a verified kind of position, which means that someone comes in and just double checks your numbers. Because if you're going to be out there telling stories about what you're doing as a business, and particularly if you do your baseline and then you do a whole bunch of really good stuff that reduces your emissions, if you're going to be telling great stories about what percent you've reduced your emissions by, you better be sure that that first number was right. So even if you only get your baseline first year's emissions measured and verified, because there's a cost to it, right? You're best to do it with your first time you do it, so you know you're getting it right and you're measuring the right things. And the last two comments here, one is about the business case. So when you're doing the sums on whether or not it's going to stack up for you to do some sort of capital or a move in this space to build sustainability into your business, then don't only think about the costs, but obviously think about the costs over whole of life. So when you talk about EVs, factor in that you're going to have much lower maintenance over the life of those vehicles and so forth, but also factor in the income and the revenue, because there's an opportunity here. You're doing this to get in front of customers who you otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to speak to, right? Their ears wouldn't be open to you if you weren't doing this sort of stuff. So think about the revenue opportunities as much as the costs, because there's a growth opportunity here that businesses are benefiting from right now, and there should be no reason why you couldn't also get that benefit. And the last message is simply about consistency, and I've kind of said this already, but if you're going to be out there telling stories about how great you are, that's good. Be honest, be consistent, be transparent, but then don't say, we've gone carbon zero because you've bought some offsets, and that's all very valid as long as they're credible offsets, but then don't wrap your product in 12 different types of plastic and bubble wrap and send it to this market, this group who really care about this stuff, because they will discount you immediately. You've got to be consistent about the way you operate in this space. People who care about this stuff are classic researchers. They will investigate you, and if you don't live up to the expectations that you've put in front of them, all right, if you don't live up to that story, then they'll punish you. In the same way that all bad customers will punish you, right? They'll tell their stories on social media, they'll tell their friends, and they won't buy from you again. And on that very negative note, I've finished.